Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. A blessed Rosh Hashanah to our Jewish friends who are listening today. Happy New Year to you all. Say a prayer for the Americans abandoned in Afghanistan. They are still in desperate conditions, and I will review that in just a moment. I, however, want to begin this Tuesday with a reminder that last Tuesday, I'm live inside the Beltway, by the way. Good morning to you. On Tuesday, August 31st, 5 families made the ultimate sacrifice when they lost their loved ones in the MH605 helicopter crash off the coast of San Diego, California. The Navy helicopter went into the drink, and 5 members of the crew did not survive. Lieutenant Bradley Foster, Lieutenant Paul Fridley, Air Crewman Second Class James Buriak, Hospital Corpsman Second Class Sarah Burns, and Hospital Corpsman Third Class Bailey Tucker. The squadron spouses have established a GoFundMe that I have tweeted out to support the families of the 5 who lost their lives with the 8-ballers. That was the name of their squadron, and the Navy mourns for them. If you missed that story, it's because it was originally misreported that all members of the crew were recovered, and after a couple of days, then it was revealed that, in fact, that wasn't the case, that there were 5 fatalities that they had been searching for and could not find. It became a recovery operation. Those are the 5 dead sailors, and so our prayers for their family as well, and the GoFundMe page benefits all 5 of their families. So I've tweeted out just now and retweeted it so that you can find it easily if you'd like to contribute to that. The number one story is the number one story it's hard to find anything about, the Americans left behind in Afghanistan. The reason you won't find out about it much is the Wall Street Journal headline this morning: Biden seeks to shift focus to domestic issues after Afghanistan exit. He wants us now to forget that he abandoned the thousands of Americans in LPRs. And I'm just going to start saying thousands of Americans because while we know between 100 and 200 American citizens, and we don't know if that's the real number, I frankly have credibility issues with Team Biden because they're being so opaque about this. But we'll just say hundreds of citizens and thousands of legal permanent residents, LPRs. So it's thousands of Americans because an American green card holder is an American. They're not a full citizen, but they choose not to be, but they are often days, weeks, months, a year away from citizenship. You know a lot of LPRs, and I bet you don't even know that they are LPRs. They just haven't told you their green card status. And they're Americans, and they're stranded there as well. That doesn't count our Afghanistan allies. And so Team Biden doesn't want to talk about it. So I'm going to talk about it a lot. I'm asking you this morning at 1-800-520-1234, is this a story you care about? The Americans abandoned, and now that President Biden wants you to forget about, because he doesn't want a hostage crisis, even though he's got one. Now, 4 Americans got out yesterday. They got over the border. We don't know which border. The group that helped them across the border was done with private assistance. There are several Americans on the runway at Mazar al-Sharif, which is the second largest city in Afghanistan. The Taliban are not giving permission to the airplanes, which have been there for maybe a week now, maybe 6 days, maybe it's 7 days now, waiting to take off. The State Department has been blamed in part, but they say it's not our fault. The Taliban are holding them hostage. Robert C. O'Brien, my friend, who's often been on the show, appeared with Jason Chaffetz on Fox and talked about what ultimately could happen with this. Cut number 6, Ambassador O'Brien talking about what will be done to get people out.
Well, we'll have to see. Right now, the Taliban has control, and the Taliban has never been in a better position, primarily because they walked into billions and billions of dollars of U.S. equipment, including advanced night vision goggles, Scan Eagle drones, close air support, combat aircraft, rotary and fixed wing. So the Taliban right now is in a very good position. But ultimately, if Afghanistan is a tribal country, the Taliban are primarily Pashtuns. There are others, Hazaris and Uzbeks and Tajiks, that may not want to live under a Pashtun/Taliban rule. So you may see some resistance forming in the Panjshir Valley up by Mazar and also up in Mazar and other parts of Afghanistan. We'll have to see how that plays out. But Look, the reason that Jake is talking about financial aid to the Taliban is because we left a lot of Americans behind. And right now there's not many cards left to play to get those Americans home and get our Afghan allies home other than the economic card. And we could end up putting a lot of money in the Taliban's pocket to get our remaining Americans out. That's why this crisis is far from over. We have a lot of Americans that still need to come home. We've got friends of ours who helped us who need to come to the United States. And so this is far from over. And there are not many tools left for the the United States to play. So I think that's why you're seeing Jake and others talk about the economic aid, trying to put a carrot out for the Taliban to allow our American citizens to get back home. And that's, of course, what we all want.
Now, Alex Marquand was on CNN with Anderson Cooper talking about the escape from Afghanistan of 4 Americans over the weekend. There's a State Department release that is read by Alex. Don't believe it. The State Department had nothing to do with it. Cut number 12.
Escape from the Taliban, an American woman and her 3 children who got out of Afghanistan via an overland route after not being able to fly out. Tonight, reportedly, they are safe. CNN's Alex Marquardt now with details. So what happened?
Well, Anderson, this information is from the Oklahoma Congressman Mark Wayne Mullen, who says that these 4 Americans who the State Department announced earlier today, who made their way out of Afghanistan overland, as you mentioned, are in fact 3 children and their mother. Now, he spoke with our colleague Brianna Keeler earlier today. He says that this family was not able to get out at the airport amid those scenes of chaos that we remember. They were not able to fly out from there. They were not able to fly out from another location in Afghanistan. So they made their way out of the country essentially on foot via that overland route. Now, we did ask the State Department about this earlier today. They didn't offer much in the way of confirmation. I want to read you part of their statement to us. They said, "We provided guidance to them, worked to facilitate their safe passage, and embassy
Right there, we're not
officials
going to play their propaganda. They had nothing to do with it. That was a private group. Joe Biden cannot escape this calamity, and my number is 1-800-520-1234. If you care about the Americans abandoned in Afghanistan and the LPRs, call me. Karl Rove was on with Griff Jenkins this weekend on Fox News and commented thusly about this crisis. Cut number 2.
Well, look, you got to understand the territory ahead, and the territory ahead is not a pleasant a scene. The president has to get a budget passed. He has to get the debt ceiling raised. He says he wants to pass a $3.5 trillion spending package in a 50-50 Senate with not a single Republican supporting it and several Democrats raising very serious considerations about elements of the package. He's even got in the House, he's got groups of members of the House who say we object to some of the major money raisers in this package. So, you know, there's no easy way out of this. My opinion is that he's got too much on his plate, that he did not lay the predicate with the American people about it. I don't remember him talking at all during the campaign about having what is in essence a claimed $3.5 trillion, but the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget looked at all the gimmicks in it and said this is really $5 to $5 trillion in new spending with a whole series of new welfare benefits and entitlements with no requirement that the people who receive those benefits be working or trying to find work. So he didn't lay the predicate for it. So he's got a very rough period of time ahead of him. The best he can do is narrow it down, try and stay focused, and knock these things out in serially and keep people's expectations low, because COVID is not going to go away. The economy is not going to be roaring and going and blowing like it is. Inflation is not going to mysteriously melt away. And he's kidding himself. The White House is cynically telling reporters, oh, we're not going to talk about this anymore because it's going to go over to the State Department. They're going to talk about it because, first of all, the American people supported the decision. And you know what? They're going to forget this by the time of the 2020 election, our 2022 election. That's cynical. It's not going to go away. We're going to hear bad news coming out of Afghanistan in the weeks ahead. And the idea that the President of the United States can sort of wash his hands, you know, a la Pontius Pilate, and say, I'm not responsible for anything bad that happens from here on out. You go talk to Secretary Blinken is foolish. That ain't going to happen.
Pontius Biden trying to say, I wash my hands of the Americans in Afghanistan. That will not happen here. And my question to you at 1-800-520-1234. Do you care about those thousands of Americans and LPRs and Afghan allies abandoned, many of whom are sitting on the runway in Mazar-e-Sharif? Do you want us to ransom them? They are hostages. We have a hostage situation. I believe the media is complicit in helping the White House, quote, turn the page. to their massive proposed hike on capital gains on the house that you're in, on the death tax. They want to raise all sorts of taxes, and that's a bad enough story. But trying to forget Americans held by the Taliban, that's a terrible decision in itself. I believe that the Biden administration is going to sink for their attempted cover-up of the Americans left behind in Afghanistan. What do you think? We'll come back and talk about it on this morning's Hugh Hewitt Show. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. That music means David M. Drucker of the Washington Examiner joins me. Good morning, David.
Good morning, Hugh.
I have been talking this hour about whether Americans care about the Americans, their fellow citizens, and their legal permanent residence green card holders abandoned in Afghanistan. Huge response. Very hard to get in the 6 a.m. hour. Phones were full. Brian Rosenwald, who's an academic but a pretty smart guy, and he's a neutral observer of talk radio, wrote on Twitter, do we have any evidence that this concern over the Americans and the LPRs is widespread versus in pockets on the right? Like, I've not had this topic come up in a single casual conversation with anyone, and the numbers are too small for it to personally affect a massive swath of people like weather or COVID. I believe it's an iceberg issue, David, that many Americans know exactly what's going on, a cynical attempt to forget the Americans there. What do you think, and what do you know?
Well, what do I know? It's very difficult because I think we have to see things play out over time. I think that everybody knows about this. I don't think anybody likes it. I have my analysis has been that the mismanagement issue is a bigger deal politically than the issue itself. Now, that doesn't mean that that analysis is going to hold, in that the fact that we have left people there and may not get them out, and who knows what the Taliban is going to do in this situation, but we can guess what they might do, is not going to become the bigger issue. But and I like Brian. By the way, I like Brian Rosenwald a lot.
Yeah, he's a smart guy.
But I believe that one of the things that often happens with presidents when the American public thinks they've mismanaged something is it's one of those issues that bleeds into everything. You know, one of the things I look back on, just really briefly, is during the Obama years, there was an oil spill in the Gulf, and it took the administration then a while to get a handle on it and do something about it. I always thought that mismanagement bled into a lot of other things at the time. We know that how they mismanaged ISIS, at least in the beginning, bled into other things over time. So
now let me play the talking point for you. Ron Klain, people are mad at me because I say the true thing. He's a competent guy. I know that he's competent. He is competently repeating. The administration has made a decision. Ron Klain went out. He trusts himself to get the talking points right on CNN with Dana Bash. And this is the exchange, and it sums up the entire administration response about the Americans and the LPRs abandoned, both citizens and LPRs abandoned, and our SIV applicants in Afghanistan. Cut number 9.
We believe it's around 100. We're in touch with all of them who we've identified on a regular basis. Obviously, we're hopeful that in the coming days, the Qataris will be able to resume air service out of Kabul. And if they do, we're obviously going to look to see if Americans can be part of those flights. We are going to find ways to get them, the ones that want to leave, to get them out of Afghanistan. We know many of them have family members. Many of them want to stay, but the ones that want to leave, we're going to get them out. As the president said, what happened on August 31st is we transitioned from a military mission to a diplomatic mission to get the remaining Americans and the Afghan allies, the so-called SIVs, out of the country, and we continue to work on that.
Now you heard all of the talking points, including those who want to leave. Many of them have family members. There is an attempt to downplay this. Now, last week I kind of thought they're trying to protect these people. This week I'm just purely cynical about it. The 4 people who came overland, the planes on the tarmac at Mazar al-Sharif, I think they're cynically ignoring them because they want it to go away, David.
Well, look, I don't know that that's happening, and I don't think that that's happening. I just think that this has been a cluster from the beginning, and they don't necessarily have a plan. So they're dependent on trying to see if they can get the Taliban to play ball because they insisted, or the president insisted, on a military pullout on August 31st, even though there were people left there. And sometimes politicians just make bad decisions because they think they're making good decisions and refuse to realize that there is going to be aftershocks, negative aftershocks to what they're doing, and then they're left trying to play catch up and deal with the aftermath. That's usually what goes on with politicians. That's why, everybody always wants to let's get somebody honest in there. The problem isn't honest. They all think they're honest. The problem is some make good decisions, some make bad decisions.
And here the decision is minimize the problem. Don't talk about it. Say we think it's about 100. They won't get. We're in touch with them. Some have family. We'll get those out who want to come out, but we're in touch with them. And then count on elite media not to ask the obvious follow-ups. What's the minimum number you are certain of? Are you in touch with them by email, by phone? How many want to come out of the hundreds? Is it possible you missed many people? How many LPRs are there? What's the average length of stay? How many children do you have a hotline? And then names and stories. And I think we're going to get those names and stories this week because families are going to give up on the White House.
Yeah, that's very possible. Look, the questions actually have been asked. The administration just doesn't have satisfactory answers. But it's hard to have satisfactory answers when you say you're going to stay until we get everybody out, and then you don't, and then you're reliant on a rogue terrorist regime to act normally and help you get your people out.
Now, Dana's a great reporter, but she did not ask the follow-ups that I would ask, and they're staying away from anyone who will lean on them. That's the deal. That's what they're doing. I think they're counting not only on complicity, David. I'm sorry not to give you the last word. They're counting on fear of hurting the hostages, holding back. That worked last week. It's not going to work now. David M. Drucker on Twitter, America, at the Washington Examiner. I'll be right back on the Hugh Hewitt Show. Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Hugh Hewitt inside the Beltway live on this Rosh Hashanah, a blessed September 7th to our Jewish friends who are listening. I am joined by Byron York of the Washington Examiner and Fox News. Good morning, Byron. How are you?
Good morning, Hugh. Doing well, thanks.
The lead story for me today is also the lead story in the Wall Street Journal. The headline is, Biden seeks to shift focus to domestic issues after Afghanistan exit. White House plans to spend September pushing for passage of the president's agenda as he faces falling poll numbers. I personally believe that most Americans know about the thousands of Americans, citizens, LPRs, and SIV holders abandoned in Afghanistan, that they don't quite know the details, but they're intensely concerned with it, and that it's an iceberg issue that the president is mishandling by treating it as something that will be forgotten. David Drucker kind of disagrees with me. Brian Rosenwald very much disagrees with me that Americans are paying attention. What does Byron York think?
Well, I think that Americans' feelings about U.S. citizens being left behind in Afghanistan, I think those feelings are essentially folded in to the poll numbers that you're seeing Biden's approval rating for his handling of the situation in Afghanistan, which are in the 20s. I mean, those are Nixon and Watergate poll numbers. So I do think that Americans are aware of that. Now, a couple of things about Biden changing the subject. Of course he wants to change the subject. Answer is, the question is, will a lot of the press go along with it? If you look at Politico's playbook this morning, I mean, just tiny little mention of Afghanistan, much more on the Biden agenda. On the other hand, I didn't hear the first half hour of your program. Did you read Senator Blumenthal's tweets today?
I did not. I tweeted the story out that he is outraged, and he's a Democrat. But go ahead and tell people about it.
Well, Senator Blumenthal yesterday afternoon posted a thread on Twitter. My staff and I have worked night and day to secure the safe passage of 2 planes waiting in Mazar-e-Sharif to take American citizens, at-risk Afghan allies, and their families to safety. My office joined forces in this humanitarian mission with an incredible coalition of advocates, NGOs, former servicemen, and journalists to try to evacuate our fellow citizens and Afghan allies. By the way, NGOs, former service members, and journalists, anybody missing from that list? Like
State Department and Pentagon, yep.
Exactly. So anyway, he goes on. And so this is, as you point out, a Democratic senator, which may be necessary to give this issue enough credibility for some members of the press to pay attention.
Now, Byron, I believe in American politics. There are iceberg issues. And my most frequently referred to example of that is the famous Chick-Fil-A boycott. When Chick-fil-A got in trouble for their donations, I believe, to a pro-marriage family or anti-same-sex marriage effort. I don't know what got the Cathays into trouble, but without any publicity whatsoever, Americans by the millions showed up and bought Chick-fil-A sandwiches on a certain day to show support for the franchise. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
It was not covered in the media. I believe, though, that America is now wired separately from the media. And one of the stories running over the hidden wire, and it's only hidden from elite media or they ignore it, is this subterranean Facebook, Twitter, whatever it is, non-official communication system. And by that I mean not elite media, not government. And that they're wired into the fact that we've left thousands of people. And they also know that an LPR, I hate that term because it includes my son's in-laws up until a year ago. They spent 15 years in the United States, in North Carolina, living the American life. They became citizens after 15 years, Canadian and an Irish in-law. And now they're American citizens, but they are Americans long before they became citizens. I think we count the green card holders in this number, and Ron Klain and the others are trying to downplay this number. When do the families of the people stranded there go public? That's really the issue, Byron, because that will draw attention.
Well, I think it's going to be pretty soon. I mean, the other thing about the Klain interview that you were playing with CNN yesterday is the degree of dependence that the United States has had on third-party actors here. In this case, we're really hoping the Qataris can help us on this. So the idea is like, who are we, chopped liver? I mean, the United States is dependent either on the Taliban or the Qataris or some other nation to help get United States people out of Afghanistan. And let me say one more thing. I think on this issue of evacuations, there are two sides to this issue. There is who we have not yet brought out of Afghanistan, and there's who we have brought out of Afghanistan. And that's a lot of interpreters that we brought out. And we are finding out more about the frenzied, confused, and incomplete vetting that has taken place with Afghans who have been brought to the United States. We have one member of Congress, Representative Tiffany, I believe is his name, from Wisconsin, who went to an Army base where thousands and thousands of people have been brought, and is asking, well, what's the vetting on these people? Did they need to be brought to the United States immediately? Could they be waiting in a third country, safe from being out of Afghanistan, waiting in a third country while the United States conducts normal vetting operations that we perform on all refugees? So and they're not. I mean, they're already in the United States. The Biden administration is issuing them all what's called humanitarian parole. That is, coming to the United States because we say so. And so there's two questions on this. There's who we haven't brought out, and there's who we have brought out.
There's actually three, Byron, I think. Who we left behind, who we brought out, and what do we do with who we brought out? Because I believe there's vast bipartisan support for a very open embrace of vetted Afghan refugees, including, of course, SIVs, but even average Afghans who just don't want to live under the Taliban, if they can be shown to be safe. There's a waiting list of people who want to help, and I think the churches will organize this, like the South Vietnamese were welcome to the country at Camp Pendleton, the Cubans from Cuba, the Hungarians from Hungary, the Iranians from Iran. I believe we will open our arms, but they insist on vetting. They don't put it past al-Qaeda to sneak in some bad actors. And so the question has to be, do you want to embrace these Afghan refugees? The answer is yes, but vet, then embrace. I believe that's the general consensus position. What do you think?
Well, that's what's not been done here. You're absolutely right. I mean, this is like the difference between legal immigration and illegal immigration. And so many Republicans who are trying to tighten security at the border are saying, look, we're not opposed to immigration. It just needs to be legal immigration through a process of law and not people just flooding over the border. So in this case, they want, Americans, I think, want people from Afghanistan who have been vetted. And I do think they will give priority not just to U.S. citizens and LPRs, as you say, but to Afghans who actually did help in the U.S. 20-year U.S. effort in Afghanistan, not just Afghans who were afraid, however validly, for their future in Afghanistan, but Americans who actually helped the United States in this war that went on 20 years.
Now, people do not know this, but in the Beltway, there is a large Afghan community. And I've had 2 Uber drivers in the last month and 1 on the weekend who are Afghan expats. One, the guy on the weekend that I wrote about in my Washington Post column, is driving an Uber. He got here in 2019 after working for the Americans from 2018 back about 9 years, both as an interpreter and for Floor. He said it was very easy for him to establish his connection via both his colonel that he worked for and then the Floor Corporation executive. Vetting is not hard if you worked with an American, even if you don't speak a lick of English. If you're the brother of a interpreter or the daughter of an interpreter, you're able to be vetted, Byron. Have you actually looked into the vetting process? It's not that hard. These people actually have names. They've got the receipts, to use the cliche.
Well, the vetting process normally takes a long time, and there has been controversy in the past over how long it takes. Does it take so long because there's so much investigating to be done, or does it take so long simply because the bureaucracy, puts something in a file box and it stays there for 6 months until somebody does something about it? And it appears that it is bureaucratically long, and so it could be made faster, but it needs to be done in a thorough way, and it needs to be, we need to vet potential refugees from Afghanistan the way we vet potential refugees from anywhere else.
It took 6 months for my driver, but then the American embassy was open in Kabul, and he was able to go back and forth, our $800 billion building that is now a Taliban palace. It took them 6 months. It should take less time if the State Department was not run by incompetence, but I'm afraid that it is. Byron York on Twitter, Byron York at Washington Examiner, Byron York on Fox. Thank you, Byron York. I'll be right back, America. Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt coming up in an hour. I'm going to talk with Chris Wallace about his new book, Countdown Bin Laden. I'm joined now by Admiral James Stavridis. I am just curious, Admiral, how are you? Good to see you this morning.
It's all going well, Hugh. We're starting to crack open the offices up in Washington. Travel is coming back. I think, we've got challenges with this Delta variant, obviously, but we are making some progress. So things are well. Thank you.
Well, I'm curious about, since I'm going to talk to Chris Wallace about Operation Bin Laden, and I'm going to talk with you about Afghanistan, where were you when the mission to Abbottabad went down?
I was the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, and we provided a great deal of from the distance backup to our friends at U.S. Central Command and particularly U.S. Special Operations Command. But the real heroes of the day, obviously, were those wonderful Navy SEALs. Their mission came from Afghanistan into the compound, killing bin Laden and ultimately parking his body at the bottom of the Indian Ocean. Good outcome.
It's a very interesting countdown that Chris Wallace has done, but it was clear at the beginning President Obama did not want the military involved. I even begin to think there's a little anti-military bias in there that now is attributed to the president, President Biden. Have you ever encountered that, Admiral, from the president in any of the years that you've worked with him?
No, I have not. Neither from President Obama nor from then Vice President Biden. I feel that in both cases, and obviously they worked together in the Obama administration. In both cases, I felt they strongly supported the military. I will say, as is always the case, presidents want to focus on domestic issues. That's where they make their mark ultimately. But no, I never sensed any anti-military bias. I look forward to reading Chris's book, by the way.
It's a fine read. Now to NATO and the current president, President Biden. There's been quite a lot of criticism from our NATO allies about how the evacuation from Afghanistan unfolded, and it's rather hasty and inefficient. Well, everybody I know, literally everybody I know, including me, who had any connection with anything, got calls from people who wanted to help people of a variety of situations. I'm sure you were flooded, absolutely flooded by requests for assistance during the collapse in Afghanistan. Am I correct in my assumption?
Oh, of course. I think anybody who is perceived to have access got dozens of calls. I got, dozens and dozens, I would say. And I tried to help where I could. Obviously, it was all hands on deck. And I think that at the end of the day, the tragedy of this is that there's still between 100,000, 200,000 Afghans who desperately want to leave the country, who have not yet been afforded an opportunity to do that. We've got to remedy that. It's a moral imperative.
Now, there is a political decision underway in front of us. I know you don't do politics, but I'm curious what your reaction is to it. The White House is trying to turn the page, according to the front page of the Wall Street Journal today. They want to talk about anything except the Americans, the LPRs, the Afghan allies, the SIV applicants, and their numbers are varied, who have been left behind, and the operations to get them out. There's a national security reason not to talk about them. I don't want to endanger anyone, but there's a political imperative. Joe Biden wants to talk about anything except Afghanistan. What do you see happening, and what is your advice to Tony Blinken and everybody around the president about how to manage this crisis, this issue, and a public that is growing increasingly concerned that Americans have been left behind?
I would say seize the nettle. You've got to go ahead and do everything you can to get everybody out. And I think there's basically three paths here. One of which, distasteful as it is to negotiate with the Taliban. Taliban is in the process of announcing a new government. They want to appear to be responsible interlocutors on the international scene. Give them a chance here. And so work with the Taliban, particularly on U.S. citizens, SIVs, people with documentation of any kind. Number two, in the case of the U.S. citizens, Hugh, let's face it, direct military action missions to get them out, in my view, are appropriate. I mean, the American citizens are just like an American citizen that can't get out of Yemen or Guinea or anywhere else in the world. We would be strongly looking at all our options to bring them home. We had 3 hostages held by the FARC in Colombia when I was commander, U.S. Southern Command. I woke up every morning thinking, how am I going to use military power to get those 3 hostages out? We eventually did. And then number 3 is clandestine. This is the province of the CIA. I'm certain we still have many assets, as the saying goes, on the ground. We could construct safe houses, create a kind of underground railroad, get people to refugee camps outside of Afghanistan and rescue them from there. So there's still plenty of options on the table, and the Biden administration ought to be working very hard down all 3 of those paths.
Now, Admiral, it seems like there's a cynical, rather calculated effort to talk about anything except Afghanistan. The other voice in my head says to myself, they're trying to protect people by not giving names, dates, GPS locations, identifiers. Voice of America ran a story about a woman that I, originally didn't report because it had her name and her face and too many identifiers. And I'm afraid that, the Taliban consume American media, as does ISIS-K. What is the balance? But what the White House is doing, and their spokespeople, like the very competent Ron Klain, is saying, well, we think it's about 100. We're not really sure, and many of them are Afghans. I think there's too little attention and not enough reassurance of the American people that we are working the problem. What's your sense of the balance wire that they're walking at the White House?
Well, I'll give you a third explanation for it. Yours are both coherent. A third one is they're busy as hell trying to do a lot of other things, including COVID, including disaster relief on the Gulf Coast and so on. So whether or not you and I would agree that there needs to be more attention and public focus on this, a third element is there's only so much capacity. And so what the president might want to consider is appointing somebody, perhaps a retired military officer, a senior one with experience in Afghanistan, make him or her the czar, if you will, hate the word, but somebody who can be the point person on this effort. Tony Blinken would probably say, hey, that's my job over here at State and I'm doing it. Fair enough, but I would argue this is at a sufficiently high level that it's time to consider putting a single person in charge to focus the efforts on this.
Well, I think they're afraid of America Held Hostage 2.0. And you and I both recall you were in the service and I was a young writer at the time in San Clemente when the Americans were taken hostage in Tehran in 1980 and how it crippled the Carter presidency. I'm sure they are aware of that and afraid of that. But any effort to move it out of the White House to a czar or somebody else, I think would go down very poorly. I really don't know how to balance it. I just think they're getting the balance wrong right now, Admiral.
Well, certainly people like me who have been focused on Afghanistan for 20 years would say, hey, we've got to do better here at the end game. And so I am going to continue to be a voice for those who are left behind. I hope others will as well. And I hope the administration will put sufficient focus on this to start getting real numbers out now, obviously starting with American citizens who want to leave. That's a crisis. The other issues are very significant. Again, 100,000, 200,000, hard to pin numbers on this. Let's start by working with the Taliban and see what we can accomplish, and then let's look at other instruments.
Now, Admiral, the after action or the after fiasco report has begun. I talked to a congressional aide who is assisting the Pentagon. And General Milley is being slammed for this and for that. General Milley got it from the left when he was the chairman for Donald Trump. He's getting it from the right now that he's chairman for Joe Biden. I'm very sympathetic to General Milley and the Joint Chiefs right now. But they've got to be very careful about contradicting the White House narrative about who did what when. But there will be congressional oversight. What is your advice as they put together the timeline, particularly around the surrender of Bagram? Because it seems to me they're going to run up against a day when they have to say, look, the president told us a hard cap of 2,500 and he gave us missions that required that we abandon Bagram. That day is coming, isn't it? When they're just going to admit you can't do both, protect the embassy and Bagram with 2,500 people?
I believe General Milley has already said exactly that it was a binary choice given the number of assets on the ground, and that they chose to defend the commercial airport. I think that's going to be a highly debated decision. My advice, and I know Mark Milley extremely well, he was one of the top generals working the NATO mission in Afghanistan when I was the Supreme Allied Commander. He will be brutally honest, and that's the only approach to take. The big mistake would be trying to hide the ball in any way. They've got to simply lay out the fact stream, when the decisions were made, who made them, and put that in front of the Congress. That's the Congress's role, to look at oversight of any mission the United States military undertakes.
You know, Admiral, last question. My advice to the interlocutor was establish the timeline, back it up with documents, put your story out and stick to it. Until you have that timeline down to the second, say nothing, because you have to live by your timeline or you'll have a Benghazi 2.0. So until then, until you have every document, every decision, every option documented, give nothing to the Congress. What do you think about my advice?
I think it is sound, and the Congress needs to be patient for a reasonable period of time. On the other hand, everything you just said are all knowable facts, and the U.S. military is quite good at assembling those, putting them together. So this ought to be a matter of days, perhaps weeks, certainly not months.
Will we find a decision document somewhere that says close Bagram or close the embassy?
Yes, you will find orders that are given in the military context, typically signed by the Secretary of Defense. Those are discrete, specific decisions for deployment or redeployment. Again, these are all knowable facts. This is a very much a knee bone connected to the ankle bone kind of process. It's all going to come out. Get your ducks in a row, as you say, and then roll it out, and then let's have at it and have a conversation.
Stick to the facts. Absolutely. Admiral, great to see you again. Follow Admiral Stavridis at Stavridis J. His book, 2034, continues to be the must-read novel to introduce yourself to what's ahead, and it's accelerating. Only the date was wrong. It's not going to be 2034. I'm afraid it's going to be 2022. Thank you, Admiral. Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Hugh Hewitt's here. Say a prayer for the Americans abandoned in Afghanistan. One of the persons I know working to get them home is Senator Bill Hagerty of Tennessee. Good morning, Senator Hagerty. Welcome back to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Good morning, Hugh. As always, it's great to be on with you. Thanks.
What is your best understanding of the number of Americans, both citizens and LPRs, legal permanent residents, and I don't draw a distinction between those, who are in Afghanistan still and want to get out?
It's hard to know. I've seen numbers north of a couple of hundred. I've seen reports up in the northern part of Afghanistan of over 1,000 people waiting to leave, including Americans, but without specificity. It's hard to know, and now that we don't have any presence on the ground, it's going to be exceedingly difficult to track this down.
Does anyone at the State Department answer your phone calls when you call requesting assistance for a green card holder, for example, from Nashville or Memphis or anyone like that?
Yes, they are, and my team has been working through every weekend since this debacle began, reaching out to the State Department, pressing issues for our constituents here, but frankly, people around the nation. So they have been working hard, responsive. I think it's just an incredibly challenging situation right now because the State Department are on their heels, given the position that they've been placed in.
The president is reported by the Wall Street Journal today to urgently want to change the subject. So we're getting the same talking point. We think it's about 100 or so. Many of them are Afghans, dual citizens. Some have relatives there. They don't talk about LPRs at all, and they certainly don't want to talk about the SIVs. Do you believe the White House is quite consciously attempting to get Americans to forget Americans?
They've been spinning this from the very beginning. You know, the response has been to spin, deflect, to blame others. Joe Biden says on one side of his mouth, the buck stops here, then immediately begins to try to blame others. You know, I just got back from a trip to the UK and to our NATO allies, and I think they see this as well. They feel like they were sold a bill of goods in the 2020 election. You know, Joe Biden's whole America's back theme. They realize that was complete folly right now. What Joe Biden has done is demonstrated time and again that their foreign policy at the Biden administration is really dictated by press releases and vengeance against the previous administration. That seems to be the primary motivation. It's not the stable hand that Joe Biden portrayed. It's not the 40 years of experience that Joe Biden portrayed. This is a press release-driven, domestic policy-driven organization here in occupying the White House right now, and they have left ourselves and our allies in a terrible position.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been answering questions in Parliament. Because of PM question time, there is no ability to avoid an issue. He has acknowledged 311 SIVs, their equivalent of SIVs, translators who helped the British forces in Afghanistan. You know, that's a hard number. They know exactly. We don't get any hard numbers from State, Defense, Ron Klain, or the President. Is that conscious on their part?
I've got to believe so, and I've reached out with my colleagues to get hard numbers on another item that I know concerns you as much as it does me, Hugh, and that is the inventory of equipment that we've left behind. Some of the world's highest grade military equipment is left in Afghanistan, whether it was, dropped by the Afghan army or left behind by U.S. military. We've got billions of dollars of equipment over there. I've reached to Secretary Austin. I still have not heard back from him to get a complete inventory of what was sent there, what's been removed, what's been disabled, what remains there. Our friends in the UK, our allies in NATO, are now deeply concerned because of their proximity to the problem. They're much closer to it, and now they realize very clearly that the Taliban and their allies, Al-Qaeda, ISIS-K, it continues as jihadists flood into Afghanistan, are arming themselves with some of the best equipment known to man. And what they don't use themselves may become available in what could become the largest arms bazaar in the world. You think about our foes from around the globe that can now move into Afghanistan and get the latest U.S. military equipment, reverse engineer it, modify it to use against us. I mean, this is a terrible situation.
Elite media has been accused by me and others of being complicit with the White House attempt to turn the page. Your opinion, Senator, on whether or not America's premier institutions of media are pushing hard enough on the questions about how many, where are they, what are you doing?
Well, this media has been extraordinarily forgiving for every one of the policy debacles that the Biden administration has kicked off. If you think about it from the very beginning, the Keystone XL pipeline, again, destroying our energy independence. If you think about reentering the Paris Climate Accord, putting America at a competitive disadvantage based on broken promises. You know that the signatories to the Paris Climate Accord that remained in it didn't fulfill their obligations. You've seen time and again failures at the southern border. Policy after policy, again, I say it's vengeance-driven against the previous administration, but they have precipitated a massive national security crisis at our border, yet the media looks the other way. Well, this time I think it's going to be different because the international news media is not nearly as forgiving as the domestic media have been to the Biden administration.
In fact, the Times of India has proven to be the most reliable source on stories on the ground in Afghanistan for me, followed closely by the Times of Israel. Some of the news agencies are covering it. Just American elite opinion is going along. While I have that subject in front of me, they want to make the Texas law the issue of the day. And certainly abortion or abortion rights is top of mind for the left. I believe Roe v. Wade is going to be reversed next year, but it's going to happen in the Dobbs case, and I don't think the Texas law is that consequential. But the obsession with it in the elite media is fairly consistent across every single platform, Senator.
Again, they're trying to precipitate another domestic diversion here to avoid any attention to the massive crisis that the Biden administration has created. And again, through the eyes of our allies overseas, it becomes very, very clear. What we did is we allowed the Taliban to have not only a real victory on the ground, but a massive propaganda victory. And that propaganda victory is going to be used to encourage terrorism throughout the world. It's also going to be used by our foes that aren't necessarily in the region to undercut and undermine America's posture and position. And again, as I said, they've now armed the Taliban, and they've created an incredible void there in Afghanistan where terror can emanate from the region. Again, our allies that are closer to this, and I met with our allies at NATO from Turkey, from Germany, from Italy, from the UK again, and the U.S. Leadership, all of them are permanent representatives. They are very, very concerned about the immediate threat of terror that will be at their doorstep, and also about a massive refugee crisis that's likely to evolve from this. So they're going to have an immigration crisis of their own. If you think about the proximity of Turkey to the situation, they've already absorbed a large number of Afghan refugees. These countries are trying to deal with recovery from the pandemic. Their own economies are in a tough situation, and they're telling me they don't have the room to accommodate this extreme crisis, this humanitarian crisis that's the result of the destabilization of Afghanistan.
Now, Senator, I will come back to the Afghan refugees because I believe it's a bipartisan desire to embrace as many as we can, provided that they are vetted. That's a big if. They've got to be vetted. But we'll come back to that. I want to talk to you about Guinea because you're on foreign affairs, and you were the ambassador to Japan before you went to the United States Senate. Very few Americans know where Guinea is or care about it. There's been a coup. The special forces in that country have thrown out the octogenarian dictator, and I believe he is a dictator because he's overstayed his two-term limit. He's trying to change the Constitution, but coups are never in anyone's interest. How important of an issue? There's an Islamist movement in the country. What do you think of this issue? It's of almost no interest to Americans. Another coup in a country that they don't know much about, compared to Afghanistan, where we've been for 20 years, where they are paying much attention. What ought they to know about Guinea? What ought we to think about Guinea?
Well, one thing about Guinea is that they supply bauxite, which is a key source of, a key ingredient in making aluminum. And so instability there in Guinea could create, instability in commodity prices around the world. I think the other thing, though, to take a step back and take a look at is that Islamic militants gravitate toward destabilized countries. And we've seen it in other parts of the world. We're seeing it happen here in Guinea. And I think, back to the emboldenment of terror that occurs when you step back and lose a country like Afghanistan, I think we're emboldening this type of action all around the world.
The colonel who has taken control of the junta in Guinea has trained with American forces. Does that give you any sense of security about him or the coup, or does it make you alarmed that maybe we're complicit in teaching people how to seize power?
It's very concerning when you think about the skill. America has the most advanced and the most competent military in the world. I understand our desire to train allies, to build them, but at the same time, we need to be extraordinarily careful about who we work with and who we bring into the fold. I think this is very concerning to me.
Last question, Senator. I've seen the refugee cap put at 50,000 by President Biden on the number of Afghans. I think that's too low, provided that they are vetted. What is your position on SIVs and the number of Afghans that we ought to admit to the United States, provided that they are vetted?
My position is that we have to fulfill our promises as a nation. Otherwise, no ally will work with us in the future. And certainly Americans, SIVs who have worked with us, those to whom we've made promises and commitments, we need to stand by those promises and commitments. You're exactly right, though, Hugh. We need to be in a position to vet these people carefully. And I have a low amount of confidence in this Department of Homeland Security under Secretary Mayorkas' ability to deal with that, given what has happened at our southern border.
No, that's a good point. Let's close on that. Senator Hagerty from Tennessee, always good to talk to you. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, joined down by United States Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas. Good morning, Senator.
Good morning, Hugh. It's good to be on with you.
Do you know how many Americans, both citizens and LPRs, are abandoned in Afghanistan?
Too many, Hugh. Too many. And that means that's because Joe Biden didn't keep his promises to American citizens, but he did keep them to the Taliban.
Now, I know you're getting ready to go to take care of kids, so I won't keep you long. But I want to know if I know your team is working on it pretty hard. John Noonan and others, Matt Downer on your team, post about it. Do you have a hard number? I mean, they say, Ron Klain yesterday say it's about 100, but some of them are, the talking point. Some of them are Afghan, some of them have family. Those who want to leave, we will get out. It's a talking point. They won't tell us anything.
Yeah, Hugh, we don't have a hard number, and that's because I don't think the Biden administration wants to give a hard number. Because if they gave a hard number, then there'd be a baseline against which to measure their terrible performance. But I think it's safe to say that there are probably hundreds of American citizens there, and hundreds, maybe even more than 1,000 green card holders. And here, let's remind everyone, the green card holder is just one step short of citizenship and has a right to become a citizen. They can basically do everything but vote in America. They have a right to live and work in America and to travel freely. And the Biden administration is treating green card holders in Afghanistan worse than they're treating random migrants from anywhere in the world that show up at our southern border.
I want to stress this. My son's in-laws were LPRs, legal permanent residents, for 15 years. One was Canadian, one was Irish, and they became American citizens last year, and they're now American citizens. That didn't make them different on day one to day two, except in that they could vote. LPRs, for a variety of reasons, don't change, but they become full. I mean, they're your neighbors. And I cannot believe we're drawing this distinction. They're American. They're just not American formal citizens.
Yeah, I think, again, Hugh, the reason why the Biden administration began to draw that distinction in the final days before its abject retreat out of Afghanistan is because there are many more green card holders there than there were citizens. And they wanted to do everything possible to minimize the number of Americans and green card holders that we were leaving behind for nothing more than PR purposes. They're treating the debacle in Afghanistan like it's a bad campaign news day rather than a catastrophe that has stranded thousands of Americans and green card holders and Afghans with approved visas behind Taliban enemy lines. As we've seen in recent days, it's pretty clear the Taliban, unsurprisingly, is not allowing these people to leave freely.
The headline in the Wall Street Journal, Biden seeks to shift focus to domestic issues after Afghanistan exit, tells the whole story. Do you believe elite media is complicit in this effort to erase the Americans, both citizens and LPRs, left behind?
So some of the media is certainly trying to assist Joe Biden in moving on and turning the page, treating it like it is, in fact, a one-day campaign news cycle. But I will say that other parts of the media continue to highlight some of the plight of the Americans and the green card holders and the Afghans who serve with us in Afghanistan. Some of the media is also starting to highlight some of the other bad mistakes that the Biden administration made in the waiting days in Afghanistan, because they screwed things up coming and going, Hugh. They didn't just leave behind so many people who we should have evacuated. They also evacuated people who had no clear connection to the United States, who didn't serve with our troops, and who were now learning through vetting processes, which are I got to say, pretty meager, don't have a right to be in America or shouldn't come to America. So the media is continuing to cover some of the Biden debacle, but this is such a catastrophe, and it's such an abject failure of the president's duty to American citizens that it should be front and center.
Now, you are Army veteran, Senator, so I feel comfortable asking you this. I believe General Milley got thrown under the bus yesterday by White House sources, suggesting that Bagram was closed as a military decision. I believe they are throwing the military under the bus. Now, General Milley is not popular with the right now because of the CRT issue, but he was hated by the left at Lafayette Park and hated because of January 6th. I think General Milley's doing as good a job as anyone could do right now in answering questions. But he is in the chain of command. Did you notice yesterday the White House began to throw the military under the bus on Bagram?
I did take note of that, Hugh, and I think when the Congress conducts our oversight of this matter, it will come to light what has been fairly well established already, that the military had to close Bagram because Joe Biden put an artificial deadline and an artificial cap on troop numbers in Afghanistan. This, again, is not a matter of withdrawing from Afghanistan or staying in Afghanistan. Reasonable people disagree on that. But once that decision was made, Joe Biden even then was putting arbitrary caps on troop numbers. And when the military told the president that we don't have enough troops to secure the embassy and the airport and Bagram, the White House's response was, too bad, I guess you'll have to cut one of those missions. And they had to keep the embassy open. They had to keep the airport open, so that meant they had to close Bagram. This goes back to Joe Biden's very mistrustful, unhealthy relationship with our senior military leaders. It's been widely reported, even in Barack Obama's own memoirs, that Joe Biden was always telling President Obama during the Obama-Biden era that the military was trying to box him in, was trying to limit his options. This is what happens when you have a commander-in-chief that doesn't understand and doesn't respect the professional military advice of our senior leaders. Doesn't mean that he has to take it always, but he doesn't even listen to it in some cases.
Do you believe or know, Senator Cotton, whether a document exists that leaves the choice to the president that he must pick 2 out of 3, airport, embassy, and Bagram? Because I think that they probably avoided a decision document like that. I am curious if there is a White House decision document that says we pick the embassy and the airport, close Bagram.
Well, Hugh, I don't know if there's a White House document. And I can't say for sure that there's a Department of Defense one, but I've been in the Army. I know about the military's bureaucratic practices. I am almost certain that there is a decision document that lays out various courses of action that the Department of Defense could take, and that is not the kind of decision that would be made by Frank McKenzie or Mark Milley or probably even Lloyd Austin. That's the kind of decision that's going to be made at the White House. Maybe it's not going to be made by Joe Biden personally, but it'd be made by Jake Sullivan or Ron Klain or someone else on his behalf. And the Congress is going to get to the bottom of what was, in retrospect, probably one of the worst mistakes of the last 3 months, which is abandoning our secure air base with a significant perimeter to protect against the exact kind of suicide bombing that claimed 13 American lives.
Now, I know an individual in General Milley's circle, and I am told exactly what you just said, that the choice was those 3, we have enough troops for 2, and they would not lift the cap on the troops. But my advice to this individual was tell everyone you can to get a story straight, a timeline down, and every supporting document in one binder so that you do not have to change your story on timing or detail even once, or you'll have Benghazi on your hands. And I believe that the Pentagon would be well served to over-respond rather than under-respond at this point. What's your advice to the Pentagon, Senator, on how to respond to the queries, which will never stop until we have a day-by-day, hour-by-hour, minute-by-minute timeline and documents supporting a decision tree here?
Well, that's sound advice not only to the Pentagon, but to anyone in the administration. Look, Congress is not just going to move on from this fiasco. We're going to get to the bottom of what happened. And if the Democratic Congress right now won't do it, then we'll get to the bottom of it in early 2023 once Republicans have won back control of the Congress. But not just the Pentagon, but anyone who is involved in this needs to understand that Congress and the American people are going to insist upon answers, and they need to have those answers ready, and they need to be documented and demonstrated with evidence. Any kind of shifting explanation or political spin or CYA is going to be exposed.
Last question, Senator Cotton. I know you're on the ground a lot in Arkansas talking to people, but I know you're in places like New Hampshire and Iowa talking to people as well. The Biden administration and the president are counting on the American people forgetting the Americans. I don't think there is a chance of that happening. I believe this is an iceberg issue, no matter how much the media covers or doesn't cover it. Are you hearing about it from the average American who does not have a family member stranded there, but who is concerned about Americans being left behind and our allies?
Hugh, not only across Arkansas, but across the country. adjourned our session right before Kabul fell. And since then, I've been in Arkansas, Tennessee, California, Nevada, Wisconsin, Iowa, and almost every place that's dominated the conversation. So much so that several times the host of the events where I've spoken have just asked me to speak about Afghanistan only. As much as they are concerned about things like critical race theory or rising crime in America or the Democrats' reckless spending bill, this is an urgent concern to them. And I don't think any American is going to forget the scenes that we saw play out at the Kabul airport of chaos with Afghans running alongside our C-17s, of an Afghan plummeting to his death, having strap hanged onto the outside of a C-17. They're not going to forget the pain and the anguish that those 13 Gold Star families felt. This is going to tarnish Joe Biden's legacy for the rest of time. And it's also going to significantly play a huge factor in the elections next year. Americans may have been somewhat ambivalent about 20 years of presence in Afghanistan, but Americans don't want a president who humiliates America on the world stage and subjects our citizens to being effective hostages of a terrorist gang.
Thank you, Senator. I know 9/11 changed your life. I know it put you on a different path from Harvard Law into the United States Army and eventually the Congress of the United States. We'll talk about that after the commemorations are done, but I think it's more important that you're working on this, and I appreciate that you and your team are doing so. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Hugh.